Hello and welcome to this very exciting discussion that Indian Cultural Forum and BDS India have organized. We are hoping this to be a first in a series of dialogues that we would have around this year. Today we are going to put together um, a large part of history and context together for a conversation that is connected around the question of apartheid. We are looking at apartheid then and now, and we are basically focusing on institutionalized forms of discrimination in South Africa, in Palestine, and in the context of South Asia. What motivates us and what motivates this conversation is that, well, as BDS India and as Indian Cultural Forum, we've spent a long time working on Palestine solidarity and working on BDS. And you've attended, I'm sure our listeners and viewers have seen the work we've done over the years around this. But starting last year, the focus on Israel's apartheid has also brought in several aspects that don't actually start, but actually restart a conversation that got left behind, which was a conversation of an idea of decolonization that emerged from the global South, an idea that it is the South that's going to lead the world towards a more progressive and more egalitarian forms of coexisting around the world. And in this conversation, we are not just talking about those past ideas, but actually how do we actualize it today in a world which seems more divided and isolated than ever before. Today, we'll be focusing on South Africa, on Palestine, and on South Asia. The Global South response that started in South Africa last year as a response to Israel's annexation plan, which then brought in diplomats and political leaders and political and cultural activists across the global South. There are about 700 signatories to this response calling for a UN investigation in Israel's apartheid, has been a first step in this. And today we are taking a more concrete form in that journey, where we are especially talking to our comrades from a comrade from South Africa. And that particular history has its own value for us, from Gandhi to E.S. Reddy to the contemporary moment. Progressive voices in South Africa and in India have come together on various occasions. And this is a moment when we want to start thinking together about a future that we envision from our own locations. So where we think of not just solidarity, but actually think of joint struggles. And I'm really honored to have with us today Professor Usuf Chikte. He works on public health, and he's also an activist who's part of Palestine Solidarity of the South African BDS Coalition and a group that is called People Against Apartheid and Fascism. They have addressed questions, issues of the CAA and the abrogation of Article 370 that happened in the last year. So for them, this conversation with India has actually been going on since a long time, and we're very honored to have him here. And we also have Cynthia Stephen, who I think most of us here know as a leading voice, as a Dalit feminist activist, civil rights activist. And I'm just going to pause here, and I will first invite Usuf, who would be talking about South Africa and Palestine. And then Cynthia would talk about South Asia. And we'll be addressing a number of aspects of institutionalized forms of discrimination, of apartheid, but also how these experiences bring us together in struggle. So it's not just that how we are oppressed and systems that oppress us are linked or common or similar, but more importantly, it's our struggles that are connected. And I'm really excited that we are starting this conversation and beginning 2021 on a better note than what 2020 has been for I think most of us. So Usuf?
So thank you. Firstly, let me salute you for this initiative, and I'm delighted to be part of it. I think it's vital, it's necessary, and it's like oxygen to us in this part of the world. I'm Usuf Chikte, I'm based in Cape Town, and I would just broadly say that the issues facing us at a global level are similar. And so the necessity for a unified approach and a uniform approach or an understanding of what affects us is important. In order to change something, we need to understand it first. We live in a time, an extraordinary time of a pandemic, which is creating havoc amongst us, and a rapacious capitalist order, neoliberal system, and within that, a rise of neo-fascism from America to India and also in the African region. The issue around that we are focusing on today is apartheid. It's a legacy that has been bequeathed to our colonialism, and it had its origins in 1948. 1948 was a very important year, a very milestone year for both India, Palestine, and South Africa. In India, we saw the petitioning of that great subcontinent, the legacy of which we are still trying to deal with. And in Palestine, we had the Nakba, the insertion of Israel into that part of Western Asia. And in South Africa, we had the rise of in the aftermath of the Second World War, the rise of a nationalist party with its Nazi links, and who introduced the system of apartheid in South Africa. Apartheid really is a sequel to colonialism. Apartheid in South Africa started when the Dutch East India Company conquered this part of the continent in 1652. And the first thing that they did after conquering the local population was to build a wall and a fortress. And this kind of segregation and military approach to dealing with conquered people has been the model. This has been refined in 1948 with the rise of the Nationalist Party in South Africa, whereby they introduced the system of apartheid, which means to put apart, to separate, to segregate. And the basis upon which they did that was to say that we are not equal. They drew inspiration from a concept called the superiority or the supremacy of Western Christian civilization or European civilization, imagining it to be superior to other kinds of civilizations, to justify the subjugation and suppression of the local population for material gain. So apartheid, those were the origins, the coinage of the word apartheid. And what they did was to establish legislation to justify, to give effect to the system in order to exploit people, much better, to regiment and control people. And one of the first things, there are three things, I think, when we assess apartheid that we must consider. The one is the myths around it. They introduced a whole range of myths that we're dealing with populations which are not civilized, that we're dealing with populations which need to be the child races, that there is, in fact, something like a race, which is a myth. There's only one race, and that's the human race. And that they brought about laws in which to give effect to what they are doing or what the intentions were. And thirdly, they brought insecurity and militarized and police forms of governance, which was an attempt to tackle the resistance around these measures that they've introduced. So one of the first things that they did was to separate the population on the basis of Europeans, called whites at that time, and non-Europeans, divided the non-Europeans into blacks, into coloreds, that's so-called colored, which is mixed race, and African, the local Bantu, another sector of the population. And this divide and rule tactic has been a tactic of colonialism from time immemorial. So this is what they did, and then they embarked upon a process whereby they introduced laws which controlled lives from the womb to the tomb, from the cradle to the grave, really. But this was met with great resistance in several forms. Resistance in the form of defying these laws, opposing it, and bringing about very innovative ways in which to counter the hegemony and the privilege that they allocated themselves. And this is one of the great things that we need to challenge, the myths underpinning a justification for the exploitation of a system of apartheid, which is a sequel to, which is a continuation of colonialism. So that's in broad what they did, and they introduced legislation which disenfranchised people or reduced them to non-citizens. They curtailed educational initiatives, stunted actually education, stultified, introduced censorship where people couldn't have information around it, suppressed political activities and dissent. So they introduced this a volley of laws designed to imprison and incarcerate people within the country. And as I indicated, it was around education, it was around health, it was around landlessness, reducing the local population, robbing them of the land or smoking them off the land. It was around, but an important aspect that we often don't think about that apartheid did or oppression does generally is affecting the dignity of a person, the inviolability of a person's home and its personhood. And that kind of imposition really is a method employed, as Frantz Fanon and many others have said, whereby they enslave the mind, that you actually start believing that you are this person, that you are inferior, that you are subordinate, and that there's no way out. Apartheid South Africa was a very powerful force. They had nuclear capability. This they could, and this they collaborated with Israel. They boasted, they had a powerful military. And they boasted, like Israel does, that it can go from the southern tip of Africa to Cairo before breakfast. They relied on their military might, not only to suppress a local population, but also to threaten and intimidate people around them, causing havoc in the region, really, as they did in Zimbabwe, Mozambique, Angola, starting wars, destabilizing the region. So the patterns are very similar to what is happening in Israel currently. So, but let me talk about a little bit about the resistance. Difficult as it was, brutal and savage as it was, there was never, what was very inspirational was the struggles and the support of India and the Palestinian people at that time, especially in the 60s and the 70s. And this was like a breath of fresh air, which galvanized and provided hope for us. India in particular took a lead just after its independence in 1948 at international fora, supporting anti-colonial struggles, fighting very bravely and almost at a lone voice at times against racism at the United Nations. Unfortunately, this has stopped. There was also, or this isn't as prominent as it was, but a big issue around this with the rise of neo-fascism is that we have gone 2 steps back in terms of our governments, at least, when it comes to this, not with the population. With the population, you know, there was a great quote during Nehru's time and now with Umar Khalid, when he said what the neo-fascist Modi and Netanyahu and Trump now up till today, what they've lost is they couldn't capture the minds of the youth and the populations. So we are engaged in a battle of the mind. And this is so inspiring that we are gaining and that we are winning, and that there isn't a position of these neo-fascists where they can just trample over us without any form of resistance. But the battle for the minds and the ditching of the myths that there are to underpin neo-fascist kind of Inditwa, apartheid ideology, or supremacy, as Beth Salem now says, Jewish supremacy in Israel, that this is not going unchallenged. One of the great resistance efforts in South Africa was the weapon of the boycott. Very soon, very quickly, people realized the precondition for a successful challenge to colonialism and thereafter neo-colonialism and its form of apartheid in South Africa was that we need to be united. We need to know what we want, and we need to have a program which unites us. And that's easier said than done. That we need to build our organizations, but the success of colonialism rested quite a bit on collaboration from the local population. And that is why the boycott, disinvestment, and sanction movement is so important. In South Africa, we advanced the concept of boycotting apartheid institutions. We made it very clear, we went to lengths to explain that we must never become the instruments of our own oppressions by working the machinery of our oppression, both internationally and locally. And South Africa could survive because there was a kith and kin relationship between the Europeans, the colonial settlers in South Africa and Europe. That's why it's very important that the South-South collaboration, decolonizing the struggle, decolonizing international solidarity is important, because we all do not want the same kind of thing. The foreign affairs departments of the European Union and United States dictate largely the extent to which the support is provided from that sector. So we need an independent movement. Besides the boycott, non-collaboration, we need an independent grassroots movement tackling the new forms of colonialism, the new forms of fascism, which is spreading and raising its head all around us. So apartheid has gone global. The United Nations declared apartheid a crime, or an act which needs to be opposed in terms of racism. The ICC and the Rome Statute makes it a criminal offense, imposing the obligation on one to act against this. In South Africa, we had several Nobel laureates comparing South Africa to Israel and making it very clear after due scrutiny that Israel meets the standards of an apartheid state. And it's important for us to recognize that, recognize this crime against humanity. And the Human Science Research Council in South Africa, although previously John Dugard, the Special Rapporteur on Palestine, the UN Special Rapporteur on Palestine, indicated that there is evidence of apartheid in the occupied territories. The Human Science Research Council went further and said there is even evidence of, and the Russell Tribunal, of racism and apartheid and colonialism across Israel, which has been echoed now recently by Beth Salem, an NGO, a human rights NGO in Israel, where they've come out very strongly, providing evidence that Israel is an apartheid state from the Mediterranean, from the river to the sea, from the Mediterranean to the Jordan Valley. And so we need to, so now that we have mounted, it took us several years to come to this point, to reach this the growing consensus, international consensus that this is the case. And when apartheid was declared racism was declared a violation of human rights in the 1970s in South Africa, what the South African regime and nationalists did, they embarked on a campaign at the UN, at the ICC, and they launched a diplomatic effort, very similar to what Israel is doing now in trying to corral, with the assistance of the United States, to reduce the impact of this. Israel, like South Africa, must be reduced to a leper state because of its discriminatory policies, a pariah state because of its discriminatory policies. It must be boycotted. It must be, the investments must be challenged in Israel. And we have the agency and the power, like we did in South Africa, at a sports level, at an academic level, at a religious level. And so we need to form these grassroots groups and organizations at all levels in our efforts to counter the propaganda, to counter the myths, and to reorganize ourselves internationally. It's very important to do this internationally on the basis that you've indicated, on a south-to-south basis, because we must get off the colonial loop in terms of our intellectual and political dependency around here. We have the agency. We can do it. We are many, they are few, as Shelley the poet said. And let us ensure that the Palestinian rights are recognized. I just want to say something very briefly about, in addition to the role of Israel in the Middle East. We are not against the Jewish people. We yield to no one when it comes to our abhorrence and our fight against anti-Semitism and the denial of the Holocaust. And we yield to no one on that front. However, Israel is using anti-Semitism as the South African regime used communism during the Cold War to dismiss our efforts at a human rights installation of and the recognition of the rights of Palestinians and the accordance of human rights to that section of the oppressed of the world. So I think I'd like to emphasize that, and that we need to embark on this mobilization internationally, and I was very happy to be part of this. I'll stop here for now. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Usuf, for covering that vast swath of history and politics and bringing us to this current moment where significantly, as you mentioned, and the biggest Israeli human rights NGO has now called Israel an apartheid state. And that really means that the work that civil society and solidarity groups have been doing is yielding more than anything else. So this recognition of Israel as apartheid state is because there is work that has been done to reach this point. And that's important to kind of recognize. And the other important thing that I would just add before we move to Cynthia is that another connection that brings India, South Africa and Palestine today is the use of the instrument of boycott in our own struggles against colonialism and racism. And that tool is something that we have always remembered, as you say, to not be an instrument of the oppressor. So thank you for bringing that in. We now move to Cynthia and to the context of South Asia. And Cynthia, thank you for joining us, and can we have you on?
Yeah, thank you so much. It's a privilege and an honor to be here as one of the speakers for this initial of the first part of the series that is being planned. And I've been asked to share about the CAA and the caste issue, and placed in the context of South Asia. The idea of caste is so much more foundational than the idea of apartheid in the society as an impact, and has impacted for far longer and vaster populations in the South Asian context than apartheid has in the rest of the world. This is, I think I would be safe in saying this. And the reason is, the fact is that uh, caste is an all-pervasive imposition on the society, where it is the value of the citizen is hierarchically determined by birth. So people who are born into a certain category are assigned those categories and live and die in those categories. And this hierarchical system has been given religious sanction, and in time has acquired social, political, and economic sanction and power as well. So it is indeed a very, very, and plus, of course, the aspect of gender, where caste and gender, the overlap of caste and gender. So, of course, and when we talk about religious, what religion are we talking about? We are really talking about the Brahminical form of religion. And I do not use the word Hindu because it is a very much contested term, and again was a term that was brought in by the colonial powers and for their own administrative convenience, and has now been co-opted into a political agenda by people who want to hold on to power, because, as I said, it has got the sanction of religion, politics, economics, and society. And so with this, and then the other point I'd like to bring in is that it is based on it is based on the contents of a certain text called the Manusmriti, which is several hundred years old. And people say, no, nobody follows the Manusmriti, or nobody is reading that. It's not like, it is a smriti, it is a kind of religious text, but it is not the important religious text. I beg to differ. There is no need for us to read the text. The practice of the principle of hierarchy and inequality has now seeped so much into the society that it is all pervasive, and one doesn't really need to read any text to understand. And one of the important things that one says is that one remembers when one talks about Manusmriti is the phrase that talks about inequality of women. Na stri swatantram arhati. The woman is not capable of freedom. Women should never, because she's not capable of freedom, she should be never given any freedom, and she therefore has to always be under the control of any male in the family. So when she's young, she's under the control of the father. When she's born, when she's a child, when she's older, of marriageable age, she passes into the control of the husband. And when she's old, presumably the husband no longer is alive, she is under the control of the son. So at no time in her life span is she allowed to be an independent agent. This is the principle. I think to this day, this principle is very faithfully followed across the country, across the cultures, because you know that even marriages are still arranged by the families. Girls' inheritances are mediated by the fact that they are girls, even if they're the heir to the property. And so the only chance for the women to come towards equality has been the Indian Constitution. So left to itself, Indian society would have gone deeper and deeper into, just on the basis of gender alone, would have gone deeper and deeper into inequality. So the redeeming factor has been the Constitution of India, which mandated equality and non-discrimination on any basis for every Indian citizen. Now, so then that brings me to who is the Indian citizen? So I have in the original plan, the Indian citizen is everyone who is born in India, whose parents are born in India after partition. If you moved into India after the certain date on partition, you became an Indian citizen. Or if your father or grandfather was born in India, I mean, one parent or grandparent was born in India, you're an Indian. Later on, there were some modifications which continued to only talk about residence, about domicile. So if a person got married to an Indian and they lived here for a certain number of years, they became naturalized citizen. A foreigner for 11 years, if they reside here continuously, then they can ask for and become a naturalized Indian citizen. This was the only basis on which citizenship was decided. But it is only in much very recent times that some modifications have been brought into this idea of who is an Indian citizen. Needless to say, this happened during the 2004, during which the BJP came into power. And at that point, there were some, and it was also a long-standing demand in Assam because of migration from Bangladesh. Even for people who migrated from Bangladesh from the 25th of March 1971, all those who migrated from Bangladesh into Assam were considered, that is a cutoff date. Anyone who comes after that, there has to be some additional conditions. So this was the reason why a national population register was demanded and approved by it was a political hot potato, but therefore it was the current regime which felt comfortable enough because of their resounding majority in parliament to pass the NPR, the National Population Register. And because it was first mooted in Assam, it was like a test case, and they ran the population register in Assam. It was the assumption of the government that a large number of illegal aliens from Bangladesh should be identified as a result. Now, what did you have to determine if you're a population register? It's not enough for one parent to be Indian. It was necessary for the second parent also to prove that they were not Indian or they were not illegal aliens. Now, this is where the nub lies. Assam is a riverine state with a very huge large number of rivers passing through it, and floods are very common. So often when the river turns its course, entire villages get washed away. Therefore, it is very difficult and lots of people don't have proper houses. And so to protect your documents, it's not easy. Governments also are hard put, for instance, for administrative reasons, to provide, documentation. How will a rural, tribal, forest dweller or river dwelling person be able to prove their parents or grandparents, antecedents with documentation? But however, at the end of this very painful exercise, it transpired that far from identifying illegal aliens across the street across the border from Bangladesh, 19 lakh local Hindus were not able to prove their antecedents. So they became, in a sense, what they call illegal. So disputed, their citizenship is in dispute. And it is in this context that the Indian government brought in the CAA. That is a Citizenship Amendment Act. Again, another amendment. What was this amendment to the Citizenship Act? As you all know, not only is the Constitution of India guaranteeing equality, it is also a secular constitution. And religion does not come into any part of your identity when you are an Indian. But at this Citizenship Act actually brought the element of religion into definition of the citizen. So in a very, it is not so simple, but to oversimplify, what happens is, in the three Muslim majority countries of Afghanistan, Bangladesh, and Pakistan, the CAA says that anyone who wants to become an Indian, any religious minority family, anyone from the Sikh, Christian, Hindu, Buddhist, religions, who are, the religious minorities in these three countries, these specifically three countries, if they want to apply for citizenship, they will be able to get it. There'll be a fast track for them. This is the interesting part. And so everybody, it's merely a fig leaf to bring the 19 lakh, that is 1 lakh is 100,000. So 1.9 million Hindus in Assam who have not been able to prove their identity, citizenship. It is a backdoor for these 19 lakh to be brought back into legal citizenship. Actually, this is the real reason why. If you look at the timing, that's what it is. So because this is basic, and it only talks about 3 countries: Afghanistan, Bangladesh, and Pakistan. The point is that there is a lot of religious persecution happening to religious minorities other than these minorities. For instance, the Rohingyas have suffered in Burma, and they have many of them have moved to Bangladesh, and because they are Muslims, but they also speak Bengali, there is a problem there. And so it's very difficult. So in fact, the UNHCR has had to give the refugees, they're almost like stateless people. A lot of them have been sent away from Burma, and some of them have landed in India. Many of them are in Bangladesh. So the act is silent about this large population of religious minorities persecuted for not just religion but also for ethnicity. Then in Pakistan, for instance, Ahmadiyas are considered oppressed, and they have not been included. So it just shows that it's a disingenuous attempt by the government to bring to twist the provisions of the law in this manner. Now, the point is that everybody knew what was going on, but because it was clearly a violation of the norm of the constitution, and trying to introduce a religious element in a religious identity into the citizenship element, the entire country, though people kept trying to say, this doesn't apply to you, it doesn't apply to anyone from India, but then anyone who's not a migrant, it only applies to migrants who are coming in. So, but that was not about, we knew it was not about those migrants. It was about people within India soon having to, it is like a Damocles sword. Anyone who has any problem with the authorities can easily be asked to prove their citizenship. So it's an easy route for the government to get into different kinds of harassment. As it is, we have had a lot of human rights violations in the government by incarceration without proper due process of large numbers of human rights activists. So all these people who are working to protect their livelihoods, their natural resources, are currently being incarcerated. And so that brings me to the other. I've already mentioned how the religious practices, the social order, others the woman from citizenship and agency. In the same way, this religious order or the social order also others indigenous populations, Dalits and Adivasis, and they are othered along with women, and of course other minorities such as the third genders and the religious minorities. So this is the way in which the caste system, the structures, and the social order, the political system have operated outside the realm of the constitution, but actually in real terms brought a lot of have violated a lot of rights of the population, of the people. And in this, it is because of this that the entire country, even and now you can see, that very, very large farmers agitations are happening with support from across the country, and people are laying siege to the city of Delhi, to access roads to Delhi. There's large, like thousands and thousands of people sitting there on strike against the government's laws. So this is the way in which dissent is being treated. And the dissent is not only dissent because of political reasons, but because of caste, ethnicity, and challenges to the religious identity. There is this whole connection between how, what is legitimized by the Indian state and by its laws, and what is delegitimized. So this delegitimizing of the minority, religious minorities, women, ethnic minorities in certain cases, all these are all linked together in this aspect. And that is why the entire citizenry of India protested in a very unique way. What did they do? They used to gather by the street and read out the preamble to the constitution. As I said, the basis of the social order is caste, but the basis for the present Indian society to survive and move forward into progress is our constitutional values. So, in order to reinforce their faith in this constitution, the people of India have uh, decided to protest by reading out the constitution. So there's lots of protests called "We the People," because those are the opening lines of the Indian constitution, and also indeed the preamble. And so this preamble talks about equality, fraternity, non-discrimination. And so therefore, we feel that this is an important way for us not only to assert our own rights, but also in doing so, the citizens of India are asserting the international, their solidarity with the international discrimination systems of discrimination that are found in other societies, including in South Africa, the apartheid, and in in the Israel or in the Middle East with Palestine and other countries. So I think this is the important connection, the othering, the way the social order others certain large sections of society, how the political the Brahminical, patriarchal, and political, religious majoritarian establishment has tried to assert itself, even using the rule of law, because it is in control, but in essence is actually undermining the constitution. And the citizens of India have not been deceived by this, and therefore they are up in arms and all out to protect what they know and believe to be their constitutional rights and also the constitutional values. It's also about the rest of the countries of South Asia. As I've also already mentioned, there is inequality in, for instance, I didn't talk about Sri Lanka. There also there is a lot of ethnic difference. There is a majoritarian religious social order as well, plus which is also politically strong. And there are ethnic minorities like linguistic minorities like Tamils. There are ethnic minorities like Muslims and Indian Tamils, and Hindus who also are Hindus. And so there's a huge mix of complicated situations plus the colonial history. And so there are yes, Sri Lanka has had a huge issue about political violence linked to religious fundamentalism. A similar situation has obtained in Pakistan, where there has been a lot of violence, political violence, with the army coming in to political power as well in various ways. In Bangladesh, there is a lot of the language issue has come up. The garment workers who happen to be women, and the way the society has used the work and labor of the garment workers and the expatriate workers, because lots of women and men from Bangladesh go out. So there's a lot of inequality. And when the private citizen tries to better their lives through migration, across the borders for work, it is very difficult, for governments. Particularly in South Asia, because border issues are very, very sensitive. Then now, though Nepal was not an issue till recently, now there has been a change in the equation, and they're asking for a new relationship with India. So at all levels, South Asia is, in a sense, going through a kind of a turmoil. With all, as I said, each of these countries, Afghanistan, as you know, Balochistan is an issue there. With Pakistan, Kashmir has always been a huge concern. And so all these issues, it could have become a hotspot, but for the fact that there are fairly stable democracies in South Asia. But going the way, if things go further, then reactionary forces can take an upper hand and create a lot of anti-people, stress in the society.
There's actually three methods that apartheid-like states use in implementing the segregated and discriminatory policies. The first thing that they do is to create identities, construct almost false identities or identities which is of no relevance. And within those identities, there's a hierarchy of those who are being privileged and those who are being discriminated against. So they construct identities. And in South Africa, we had the Population Registration Act, whereby people were classified as whites, as coloreds, as Bantu, as Indians. But the overall purpose of this is to divide and rule and to discriminate and privilege then certain sections after the inaction of certain laws. So that's the first thing, the Population Registration Act. In India, we're seeing a similar trend. We know in India during colonial times, the classification of people along religious lines created havoc later on. But in India, the National Registration Certificate, the NRC, is a similar method that is being employed to discriminate against people. The second thing apartheid regimes use is to segregate and separate people, geographically relocate people through a series of legislation based on population registrations and the construction of identities. And in South Africa, we had large movements of people from the urban areas to the rural areas, the construction of homelands, of Bantustans, the balkanization took place, and the spaces in which oppressed people then live shrunk all the time, and the land grabs of the privileged and of the ruling class becomes more and more and more. And this we've seen in South Africa, where most of the geographical space for South Africa was not available, accessible to the majority of the population, where they were confined into group areas and into homeland Bantustan governments. That is the balkanization that normally takes place. And we see a similar situation with regard to Palestine, where we have the Gaza Strip, we have the West Bank, and people are concentrated in these areas, and the rest of the area of Palestine proper becomes inaccessible to them. Relocation, you have relocation of settlers within occupied territories, and their movements are restricted. The third thing is, because of this invites quite a great deal of resistance, this registration and segregation and discrimination, apartheid regimes need to introduce security laws and to the police states and military interventions in order to ensure that the laws are being obeyed or enforced and entrenched. And that's why we see in South Africa then, and in Israel and in Palestine now, we have the military occupation, the militarization of Israel, in which the Palestinians are treated with great indignity, detained without trial, arbitrarily detained, sentenced, tortured, and a great deal of indignity heaped upon them. Their movements are restricted as well and curtailed. They are censored in terms of what they can do and what they can read, in terms of access to information as well. So these are the tactics that people, that military apartheid regimes use, have used in South Africa and are using in other parts of the world where apartheid is practiced, especially in Israel. But and the fourth thing that they do is once all these methods fail, they mount on a propaganda campaign, a massive propaganda campaign. They have their hasbaras, they have their trolls, they enlist journalists, they enlist judges, they enlist elements of anthropologists to reinvent myths and to recreate and to falsify history. To say that these were the original people here, these people came afterwards, and they do all kinds of tests, all kinds of research to do that. So this is another thing, and I think this has been done quite successfully in India, where the false narratives and recreations of history has been challenged very bravely by people with great integrity, and I think that is what we can learn from India in terms of the assault on the intelligence and the truth conducted by Israel in Palestine. Goethe said that every generation needs to discover truths for themselves, and it's a great, it's fantastic that young people are rediscovering and the truths about these matters, despite this onslaught of propaganda that we are facing. It's very difficult to discern fact from fiction around us. Thank you.
Well, I really thank Usuf and Cynthia for the ground they have covered. And if you'll allow me, what I see here happening is, or the way it's unfolded is that on the one hand, we're talking about what colonialism, and as is the case of all three, Palestine, South Africa, and India, of what colonialism has brought about, how apartheid has come from that particular system. Israel is a settler colonial state today. So in many ways, there are elements of colonialism, of history that we have to fight and deal with in the present moment. But it shouldn't dull us to the fact that our own societies have older or equally brutal, if not more, forms of violence and discrimination that also govern us, so that we cannot dismiss caste because the British came. We have been that society as well, or even after the anti-apartheid struggle, even when apartheid is over formally, there is huge amount of economic discrimination and racism still in South Africa. So while we understand our present moment from a history that we come from and build our connection through it, we also understand that the moment we live in today has its own forces, and it makes kind of this reality possible, that it is because India has its own systems of discrimination and violence and humiliation that today we don't see anything of that India that we remember, that was a leader in NAM, that supported South Africa, that supported Palestine. So these are interlinked. So if our society ourselves is collapsing, we would not be the ally that we have been of international struggles. And so in that sense, it is that true dialectic. But at the same time, obviously, we have not come to this point simply because we were forced. It's because people fought for apartheid to be ended. People are fighting in Palestine. People are fighting in India for the constitution and for its values and for democracy and secularism. So it isn't that we are just pushed by these forces of history, but because we are doing what we can to make these circumstances better. None of which is possible if people don't talk. So thanks a lot for this today, for this vastness that you've covered in just such a short span of time. But also, I'm also ending with the hope, and we all are in agreement in this, that this is only a first of such conversations. One that I feel many of us, not so young or young in India have missed, who have not connected with a form of internationalism that you have seen. So I think one of our tasks would be to think through this, a progressive, decolonized idea of international joint struggle. And maybe we can talk about actually the discrimination along the pandemic in our next conversation, or take up what is in front of us. But just to remember that this isn't a one-off event, but actually an ongoing conversation, which is the first element of any politics of change. So thank you a lot for that, Usuf and Cynthia. Yeah, Usuf.
So I think you make a very important point that although apartheid has been abolished in terms of its legislation about about quarter century, more than a quarter century ago, its legacy still remains with us in the form and expressed in the inequality, the intractable inequality and divisions in our society. And that battle, it will take us a long time to tackle the inequalities embedded through apartheid, through colonialism, through the caste system, and the price of the freedom that we gained through the abolition of apartheid needs to be is eternal vigilance. And it doesn't only go in an upward trajectory where it goes better and better. South Africa's constitution derived quite a lot from the Indian constitution. And it's to our dismay that the values in the Indian constitution, secularism, democracy, and egalitarian society, have been eroded for many or most of its population, despite, or a large section of its population, despite 72 years or more than 7 decades of the struggle around attaining the dreams and the aspirations of that constitution. So the price of freedom is eternal vigilance and struggle and resistance. Thank you.
Thank you, Usuf. I think those are the perfect words to end today's conversation with. And we must keep that obligation and duty close to us at all times. We'll stop here now. Thanks a lot. And we'll connect over email for if we missed anything here, the edits, the poster, because we'll share with you the publicity material before we publish it, and also to plan what we want to do next around this. Thanks a lot.